Welcome everybody to Global Carbon Exchange's monthly webinar. Today our topic is, what is a carbon footprint and why should my company be monitoring theirs? My name is Kevin James and I'll be...
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
in Global Carbon Exchange. Alright, so just to be clear on what we're going to be covering today. Alright, the topics are about Global Carbon Exchange. We're going to delve into what a carbon footprint is. We're going to take a look at the global standards around carbon footprint accounting, reporting and disclosure, what we actually measure, the project planning workshop, the format of the carbon footprint report, the carbon footprint and how it's part of a broader environmental management plan, reasons why a company should conduct their carbon footprint, and then we're going to go into one or two case studies of actual examples of carbon footprints that have been assessed. At the end of it, we'll have 15 minutes for a question and answer session. During that time, I'd appreciate it if you type your questions into the chat box that's in front of you, and we'll try and answer as many questions as possible in that 15 minutes. For any questions that remain unanswered, we will definitely get back to you either by telephone or by email after this webinar. Okay, so just let's get this out the way about Global Carbon Exchange. We're a leading environmental sustainability consultancy and training provider. Our focus is on carbon, energy, water and waste measurement and management. We also assist companies developing and rolling out their environmental sustainability strategies as well as their policies. We have training courses. We have a big focus on training and education, and we have currently 10 environmental training courses that we offer. Our offices, our head office is in Cape Town. We've got good representation in Johannesburg, Durban, Namibia, and the USA. Our team comprises a very professional team of commercial, environmental, and education experts. There's a couple of our clients on this screen. As you can see, very, very diverse cross-section of clients across very diverse sectors and all different sizes. The common thread between all these companies is they understand that there is a benefit to addressing their carbon footprint and also understand that there is a serious risk to not addressing their carbon footprint. So let's get into the beef of it. Carbon footprint. What is a carbon footprint? The definition of a carbon footprint is as follows. The total set of greenhouse gas emissions caused directly and indirectly by an individual, organization, event, or product is commonly called their carbon footprint. I'm going to safely assume that all of you understand the problems and the threats that global warming present. But if there's anybody who's unclear on any of that science, please, by all means, at the end of the presentation, write it in the question in your chat box, and we'll address it with you directly. In terms of the global standards, carbon footprint of a company's activities is governed by an organization called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. Okay, they provide a framework for carbon accounting, reporting, and disclosure. They are closely aligned with the International Standards Organization, or ISO as everyone knows them. We also work very closely with the Carbon Trust in the United Kingdom, which has provided clear guidelines on product carbon footprints, and I'll touch on that a little bit later as well. In certain situations, we also use DEFRA, the environmental organization, government organization in the UK, for certain of our emission factors that we apply to certain of the data in companies. In South African context, the Carbon Protocol is an organization, a not-for-profit organization, that provides guidance and provides really regulation in what's currently an unregulated environment. So within all these organizations, we ensure that global best practice and local best practice is adhered to at all times. Let's make this whole idea of carbon and CO2 a little bit more tangible in our minds before we continue. Okay, just so we are clear, 1 ton of carbon. Carbon is the solid state. That is everything that we see in the biosphere. That's vegetation, it's biomass, it's plants, it's grass, it's everything that we see around us. 1 ton of carbon, when burned, emits about 3.67 tons of CO2 in the atmosphere. That still doesn't mean a hell of a lot to us, but the following might mean a little bit more. 1 ton of carbon dioxide is equivalent to about 556,000 liters or 556 cubic meters, or about the volume of a 3-bedroom house. So if you can just picture that kind of volume filled with CO2, you can understand the extent of what 1 ton of CO2 is. 1 ton of CO2 is also emitted by a medium-sized car traveling about 4,500 kilometers. On average, South Africans emit about 9 to 10 tons of CO2 per annum. So that's our global, our local carbon footprint as a country is around 450 million tons. And per capita, we're one of the highest emitters in the world. In fact, per unit of GDP, we are the highest emitter in the world. And take into consideration that many of our population, unfortunately, are not big consumers due to their circumstances, this is a massive statistic and one we shouldn't be really that proud of. Globally, there are about 27 to 30 billion tons of CO2 that are emitted on an annual basis. What are the greenhouse gases? Well, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol says we should be monitoring and following 6 greenhouse gases. Okay? There's 2 concepts here that I want to get across to you. The one is something called global warming potential, and the other one is this concept of CO2 equivalent. Okay, carbon dioxide is the most prevalent greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, and for that reason we report in terms of carbon dioxide. But we call it carbon dioxide equivalent because we also need to take into consideration the 5 other greenhouse gases that we are asked to monitor by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. They all have different global warming potential. In other words, methane, nitrous oxide, hydrofluorocarbons, perfluorocarbons, sulfur hexafluoride all have a much higher impact on global warming than carbon dioxide does. But in order to be able to measure like on like, or apples with apples as they say, we need to be reporting in one metric, and that is CO2 equivalent. So the practical application of that is really that methane has got a global warming potential of 23, which means that 1 ton of methane actually results in the equivalent of 23 tons of carbon dioxide, or it has that impact on global warming. Nitrous oxide, as you can see, even higher, 296 times the impact of carbon dioxide. HFC, 23, that particular strain of hydrofluorocarbon, 12,000 times. Perfluorocarbon, as you can see as well. And then you've got sulfur hexafluoride, where 1 ton of sulfur hexafluoride is equivalent to 22,000 tons of carbon dioxide. In terms of where we find or how these gases are actually emitted, carbon dioxide, which most of us know, is as a result of the combustion of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels being coal, oil, natural gas, all those resources that we actually shouldn't be burning because they should be left under the ground. And that is what's causing the imbalance in the atmosphere. Methane, we all know where there's methane around because we can smell it. And that's really the decomposition of organic matter, manure. We're talking about just rotting matter, really, what we smell at landfills, and that is really very easy to detect. Nitrous oxide, as a result of the application of fertilizer in agriculture, chemical fertilizers, what I'm talking about, where nitrates actually result, and that is nitrous oxide gets emitted as a result of that. And even the laughing gas that we use at our dentist is actually nitrous oxide. HFC is, heating, ventilation, and cooling in businesses, as well as refrigeration gas. Perfluorocarbon, also a refrigeration gas that we use. Fire extinguishers are also comprised perfluorocarbon. Sulfur hexafluoride is emitted in the manufacture of semiconductors and some other industrial processes. In terms of the lifetimes, just so you know, those are the duration that those gases actually last in the atmosphere before they leave the atmosphere. So you can see highly impactful, those other greenhouse gases. All right, so when conducting a carbon footprint, where do we start? And I cannot stress enough how important it is to have very, very careful and clear planning, okay? So the first thing we need to really identify within an organization is who are the key and relevant personnel that are going to add value and assist in the facilitation of this carbon footprint assessment. Once we have identified those people, we actually call them the green team. Okay, these are the people that are going to be collating data that have got a really good visibility into the company's activities and how the company operates. We need to set goals and objectives, and we need to make the team aware of the challenges that they're going to face when doing this assessment. During this time, this planning process, we also need to agree on timelines, as well as roles and responsibilities and mutual responsibilities between consultants and the company that's being assessed. During the planning process, we need to set boundaries, and this is really, really important. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol gives us good guidance on what we need to do, but certain of it is up to the circumstances that prevail in the company at that particular time. The first thing we need to do is we need to select a year. And the easiest thing really to do is to mirror your carbon reporting or your greenhouse gas reporting with your financial reporting. It is the easiest, especially in terms of, especially in light of the fact that integrated reporting and sustainability reporting happens at the same time as financial reporting. So it makes sense that we actually align these two processes. Then we look at the organizational boundary. Okay, many companies, and we deal with a lot of massive diversified industrial companies, have got multiple subsidiaries. Okay, so we need to understand what the organization looks like in terms of holding company and its subsidiaries, and we need to determine and confirm which entities are actually going to be included in the organizational boundary of the carbon footprint. Then we look at the operational boundaries. The operational boundaries is taking a look at all the activities within the organization and deciding on which ones we are going to monitor and which ones we are going to be omitting. Obviously, over time, we want to include as much as possible, but for the initial carbon footprint or the baseline report, it is not always practical to include everything. So in that initial planning session, we need to understand what we're going to be looking at. Greenhouse Gas Protocol says we need to have a very good and accurate and complete handle of our direct emissions, emissions that are owned or controlled by the organization. We call that Scope 1 emissions, and I'll go into a little bit more detail in the following slide. Indirect emissions are those Scope 2 and 3 emissions, which is energy or electricity that is bought from ESCOM, as well as all outsourced activities, including procurement, distribution, and I will give you a little bit more insight into that a little bit later. So the organizational boundaries, here's an example of a company organigram, and you can see a holding company with multiple subsidiaries and even subsidiaries underneath those subsidiaries. And the important information that we require about each of these companies is how much, or what percentage is owned by the holding company and what percentage is controlled by the company. This will determine which accounting approach will be applied to the initial carbon footprint and ongoing. So if a company owns 50% or more of a subsidiary, then we should be including that subsidiary in the carbon footprint report, assuming we are adopting an equity share approach to the accounting methodology. Okay? What we would do is we'd take that carbon footprint and we would apply the percentage owned to the holding company. If we're going to be applying a control approach, we need to see what portion of the company is controlled by the subsidiary, and if so, we need to apply that portion to the accounting framework. In terms of the whole concept in one slide, I think this illustrates very clearly what it's all about. We've spoken about the 6 greenhouse gases, and those are the ones you can see in that big cloud above. But what we want to look at is this idea of Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, or as we call it, the operational boundary. Scope 1 emissions, your direct emissions, those are the emissions that a company should take full responsibility for. They're no one else's fault. Those are as a result of the decisions that a company has made in doing its business. So Scope 1 emissions is really on-site energy generation through diesel generators, boilers, kilns, furnaces, anything like that. Talking about company-owned vehicles, from the CEO's car right through to forklifts, trucks, all that kind of stuff, even aeroplanes if the company owns its own aeroplanes. Emissions resulting from industrial processes, as I spoke about earlier, sulfur hexafluoride for the production of semiconductors is a good example of a Scope 1 direct emission. Methane that is rotting of material on site is a direct emission if it's happening on site. So Scope 1, very important. We need to get a good handle on exactly what those are as accurately and as completely as possible. Scope 2 emissions is considered an indirect emission, but in real terms it is a direct emission because a company does need to take absolute responsibility for those emissions. And these are really as a result of the electricity that is bought from the grid. In this case, in South Africa, we're talking about ESCOM supplied energy, and really we need to understand how many megawatt hours or kilowatt hours of electricity is actually used from the grid. This is really important because it is indirect emission because we do not generate the electricity ourselves. We rely on ESCOM for that, and we don't really have a say over how they do that. Wish we could have more of